Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Thrive55 Plus podcast, where we give practical inspiration so you get healthier. Your host, Cheryl Jones, will help you uncover more of who you already are and explore what you need to heal and flourish one moment at a time. Cheryl is an author, wellness leader, and health coach, voted one of the most powerful women in the mindfulness movement by Mindful Magazine. There is no AI-generated content in this podcast. This has been created by subject matter expert, Cheryl Jones.
Welcome to the Thrive55 Plus show. I'm your host, Cheryl Jones, and in this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Shawn Talbott about the gut-brain connection and the relationship between food and mood. Shawn holds an MS in exercise science from the University of Massachusetts and a PhD in nutritional biochemistry from Rutgers. He is a fellow of both the American College of Sports Medicine and the American College of Nutrition. As a diplomate of the International Olympic Committee's Sports Nutrition Program, he has educated elite-level athletes in a variety of sports. Welcome, and thanks so much for being here, Shawn. We both studied exercise science. I went towards mind-body studies. You shifted to nutrition. What was your motivation for doing this?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, Cheryl, thanks a lot for having me on. I think this is going to be a fun discussion. What got me to go into nutrition? I don't know. I guess, in the early part of my career, I was like what you might call a sport nutritionist, right? So a lot of the work that I did was with elite level athletes, and they were all like, everyone's training hard, right? Everyone's working out. You can only work out so much. And at that time, I thought, nutrition would be the secret sauce, really no pun intended. But, if you could really dial in somebody's nutrition, not only could you improve their mental performance, but their physical performance. And then, athletes are only athletes for, kind of a short period of their life, at least at that elite level. And so nutrition is one of those things that could serve them well as they aged, So it's something that if you have good attention to it, it's going to be not just good for performance, it's going to be good for overall health.
Yeah, so important for us to understand at a young age what is valuable for our performance and, in life. And so what this podcast is really focused on serving people with healthy aging. And it seems like there's just a lot of confusing information about nutrition out there. And it seems like 1 month we're learning about one fad, or we're supposed to eat more of this or that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about how do we take this information that we know has helped athletes and their performance, both physically and mentally, to make those connections to, the average person just trying to get through the day, what do you find helpful in motivating us to kind of start to do a little bit more of that?
Right. Yeah. And that's what's really important, is that we can look at what we know in the elite level athletes and we can apply it to the mainstream, right? So that's sort of the soapbox that I get up on sometimes, is that, we can work with these elite level athletes, but the most important thing is to mainstream it to the average person so that they can have the best level of performance, whether they're gardening or walking the dog or, just getting through the day with good energy levels and things like that. And it really comes down to this. Like, one of the things I really try to get across to people is that it's not confusing at all. If you just look at the central things that all nutrition scientists agree on, it's that, we want to eat fewer processed foods and more less processed foods. If you just follow that, you will solve, I would say, 80 or 90% of the confusion out there. Where the confusion comes in is that, people say, well, should I eat more carbohydrates or less carbohydrates? Should I do keto or should I do low carb? Should I do that? Like, those are splitting hairs. If you can eat fewer processed foods today and more less processed foods, meaning more whole fruits and vegetables, you're going to solve 80 to 90% of the confusion.
I love how simple you made that sound. But it does make sense, right? We're eating close to the earth. We're eating whole foods. We're eating things that are found usually. I know this isn't always true anymore, but the perimeter of the store.
That's right. Yeah. And It's really funny you say that, Cheryl, because I've been telling people that for years and years and years. Stay on the perimeter, and that's the produce section and the deli section and the dairy section and stuff like that. But now what the grocery stores are doing, of course, is they're pushing some of the junk food out into those perimeters to sort of catch our eye when they're in the produce section. You're like, oh, that brightly colored package of processed garbage, that looks pretty good. I'll throw that in the cart too.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. So here we are trying to be so clear, and we think we've got the formula down, shop the perimeter, but now it's like there's a little more confusion sneaking in. So it's like we have to really keep ourselves empowered with this, what you're saying, keeping it simple and really staying focused on the whole foods.
Right. When I talk about this idea of eating for your mood, right, the food mood connection, I will very often show a chart, and that it's a pie chart, and it shows that as a population, as a North American population, we're eating about 70% of our calories from processed foods. And then I'll say to the audience, the rule of thumb is to take that 70% and make it 60 or 50 or 40 or 30. And I don't particularly care, really, if you're replacing those processed foods with more meats. You're eating more steak and chicken and fish and things like that, right? There's a whole category of people that want to eat more protein and less carbohydrates. So I don't care if you do that. I also don't care if you go sort of the vegetarian vegan side and replace that 70% with fruits and vegetables and whole grains. It really doesn't matter as long as you're going away from processed and towards whole. And what I'll really educate people on is to say, maybe do a little bit of both of those. Maybe eat more Mediterranean style diet where you can eat lots of fruits and vegetables and lots of lean proteins. And in my view, that's the best of both worlds.
That's so helpful to understand, because sometimes we get too fixated on what you had referred to earlier as kind of like the splitting hairs and worrying about, is it, the protein, the size of whatever's in the palm of my hand, and, the details, when if we just stay kind of keeping that big vision of just keep going for that which is real, that's a really solid foundation that a person could build for themselves. And particularly, when we look at the statistics of the US population, where we've got, I think it's 41 or 42% of an obesity rate. So what from your perspective is happening?
Yeah, well, it really is that reliance on processed convenience, heated up in the microwave sorts of foods. Our body doesn't process them the right way. And so they're rapidly, like those style foods, they're rapidly digested, they're rapidly absorbed. Your body doesn't handle that rapid influx of calories in an appropriate way. And so what ends up happening is you store a higher percentage of those calories. You could take somebody and give them 1,000 calories of a whole food diet and 1,000 calories of a processed food diet, and they will store a much, much higher percentage of those 1,000 calories from the processed food diet. We end up sort of not necessarily overeating calories, but we're overeating processed. And so that does a couple of things where we store more of the fat and it changes our appetite signals. It changes lots of things, which we can get into, but it's putting us in a place where we're gaining weight because it's processed, not necessarily because we're eating more calories. And so we can get into this in a little bit, but that poses risk for not just weight gain, but developing diabetes, developing heart disease, predisposing to certain kinds of cancer, and especially my specialty area of research, which is sometimes these days called nutritional psychology or psychonutrition. Eating that way predisposes us to depression and anxiety and stress, and it just makes us feel kind of crummy all the time. And that drives us to eat more of those foods. So you get into this vicious cycle of you eat these foods, you don't feel great, but you want to eat the foods, and that makes you feel less great, and you still want to eat the foods, and that's where people get into these overeating syndromes.
What you're talking about, the whole food and mood relationship. Would love just if you could elaborate just a tiny bit for our listeners on how do we think about that? What's important to know about that?
Yeah, so most people will have the experience of going and having a fast food meal where it tastes good while you're eating it. You have that fast food hamburger or the french fries or the milkshake or the soda or whatever it is. And the experience of you enjoying that is a lot of fat, a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates in general. You feel good when you get it. And some people get almost a euphoric sensation from eating a food like that. An hour or two later, your experience is that you feel kind of crummy, right? You feel a little bloated. You might feel just a little tired. That's the food mood connection acutely, right? Right when you eat the meal. But what we know is that the more that you eat that kind of a meal, you actually completely change what we call your gut-brain axis. So the food that you're introducing into your gut is either nourishing or not your bacteria in your gut. And the reason this is important, your bacteria that we call the microbiome, the reason that's important is that your microbiome makes 90% of your serotonin in the body. That's the neurotransmitter of happiness. It makes about 70% of your dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that helps us be motivated. It makes about 50% of your GABA, which is the neurotransmitter that helps us to de-stress or relax when we're stressed out. So if you're feeding the wrong kinds of food to your gut, you're feeding the wrong kinds of food to your bacteria. And as a result of that, you'll produce a different combination of neurotransmitters. So much so that the standard American diet will predispose you to depression and anxiety. And a Mediterranean style diet, which is more whole foods, can protect you from depression and anxiety. And there's huge long-term, large population clinical trials that show that your pattern of eating can significantly impact not just how you feel right now after that meal, but long-term, your predisposition to these mental wellness conditions.
It's so powerful to understand that. So what you're talking about is the relationship between your gut health and your mental health.
Right. Exactly. So much so that we call the gut the second brain, because most of those neurotransmitters are made in the gut and they have their signaling effects in the brain and the head. When I go to these scientific conferences and we talk about the gut being the second brain, all the people like me who study it, are advocating that it really should be the first brain, because that's where the neurotransmitters originate and they just happen to have their signaling effect in your head.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and it does make sense. I mean, when you think about it, for myself, how often have I said to myself that, I really need to check my gut on this, or I have, butterflies in my stomach
Right, yep.
if I'm nervous about something or excited about something. So I instinctively, and I think maybe a lot of us instinctively know that there's some kind of intelligence there. So what you're saying about understanding this as our second brain, or as you would advocate, the first brain, is really seems new for people. This is new thinking for us, right?
Yeah, well, it is new thinking, and I'm glad you brought that up, Cheryl. That we've intuitively known this. We have vocabulary around trust your gut and sick to your stomach and things like that. So we know that what happens in the gut changes how we feel, and we know when we're stressed out, that can change how the gut functions. People can get stressed and their appetite goes up or down, or their bowels speed up or slow down. So we've known for a long time that there's this link between the brain in our head and the brain in our gut. But it really is just the last decade that we have known enough about the bacteria in the gut to measure them and modulate them and see what happens when we change this bacteria. What does that do for mood? When we change that bacteria, what does that do for your immune system? So this idea of the gut microbiome is really fundamentally changing how we think about not just how we feel, our mental wellness, but it's fundamentally how we even think about what a healthy human is. And, most of the scientists on the cutting edge would agree that if you don't have a healthy gut microbiome, you can't have a healthy human. They really are this symbiotic relationship, and you really need to have both.
It's interesting. I've spent a lot of my career, really since 1996, studying and teaching and practicing mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. And I'm always, for myself, trying to find new ways to grow and put my mindfulness practice into play. And it's this beautiful dance between the being present in the moment and educating ourselves that I think leads to a higher level of self-care.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the gut, and in this conversation, as I've been thinking about it, it reminds me of all the people that have talked about probiotics. That's kind of a kick for some people. When we think about the gut, a lot of us think of probiotics. So I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do for us? How does it help us? Is it a good idea to be so focused on this?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, before we knew very much about the microbiome, right? We knew the bacteria were there, but we didn't know much about what they would do, right? And that people ask me sometimes, like, why are we hearing so much about this now? It really is because of changes in how we can analyze DNA very, very quickly and very, very cheaply. So we can measure someone's microbiome, measure the DNA in your gut bacteria to tell you exactly what bacteria are in your gut right now. So that's really been the impetus for all of this research. But back before we had this technology, we would just say to people, eat your yogurt. That's going to be generally healthy, fermented foods, or your kefir, or your kimchi, or your kombucha is really hot right now. I love those kinds of things because they can help to maintain a good environment in the gut. And what I mean by that is that eating those kinds of fermented foods will make your gut slightly acidic, and that's good for growing your good bacteria. And good bacteria are the kind that make the neurotransmitters that I talked about a few minutes ago. When we get to probiotic supplements, it can be a little iffy, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a terminology that I'll use all the time when I'm educating students or other health professionals called probiotic strain specificity. And this idea, without getting too much into the weeds, is that specific strains of probiotics will have very specific effects in the microbiome and therefore in the rest of the body. So we know now enough to say, here's this specific strain that can lower your depression, or here's this specific strain that can lower your stress or improve your immune system, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't know that 10 years ago. So we would just say to people, yeah, go get a multi-species probiotic, make sure there's some lactobacillus in there, make sure there's some bifidobacterium in there. And that's about as specific as we could get. Nowadays, we can say, if you want to lower your depression, take this one. If you want to lower your anxiety, take this different one. If you want to lower your stress, take this different one. So it's getting very almost prescriptive and therapeutic because of what we've learned over the last few years. So sort of moral of the story, don't just go to the store and buy a probiotic that's the cheapest one on the shelf or the one that's on sale. Buy the one that has the strain that delivers the benefit that you're looking for.
Interesting. So we can get to more tailoring what we're doing, and not just because our next door neighbor said it was a good idea. It worked for them, which is how most people learn.
That's right. Exactly. And that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point, Cheryl, that, your next door neighbor might have gotten one and they got one for their immune system. And that's great if they got an immune system benefit. But those immune system strains will not be the antidepressant strains, and et cetera, et cetera.
So how do we know if we have a healthy gut?
That's a question I get all the time. And what I like to educate people about is that you may or may not have gut symptoms. So if your gut is out of balance, meaning you have the wrong bacteria, or you have too many of the wrong bacteria, which are generally producing inflammatory signals. You have too few of the good bacteria, which are the ones that are producing the anti-stress, the anti-anxiety signals. You could also have a problem with your gut lining, which some people will call leaky gut. That can lead to immune system problems and autoimmune conditions and things like that. So there really is a lot going on at your gut. Like, you might have constipation or diarrhea or gas or bloating, but you also might not. And this is the thing that sometimes is a disconnect for people, is that they'll say, well, wait a minute, I don't have any gut symptoms, so my gut, must be fine. But if you're also having brain fog or depression or anxiety, or you catch a lot of viruses, your immune system is suppressed, or you're having a lot of allergies, which means your immune system is overactive, all of those symptoms could be symptoms that your gut is out of balance. And so what we'll say to people is, let's do a gut rebalancing regimen. Let's get some of these specific strains. Let's get you eating more fiber and whole foods and things like that. And the reason that they're good for our whole body is because they're good for our gut microbiome. So just doing that shift from processed foods to whole foods, that is going to make your gut so much better. And as a result of that, a lot of these other benefits just sort of fall into line.
It's so fascinating what you're saying, Shawn, because I think of, stress reduction. I've been teaching stress reduction for, again, most half of my career anyway. And the first go-to, if a person has stress or anxiety or depression is, well, I won't say a first go-to. There are many kind of obvious choices, but for me, it's, teaching people how to meditate or maybe get more exercise or do a yoga class.
Right.
But what you're saying is if you're stressed, like go to your gut, find out like what is happening in your gut, right?
Right, exactly. Because we'll see that if we can get you, and when we do a clinical trial and we measure somebody's gut microbiome, we can show them afterwards, your lactobacillus went up 20% and your bifidobacterium went up 30% and your Akkermansia went up 17%, whatever the numbers are. And we can correlate those changes in the microbiome with their psychological mood state. So we can show them that their depression index went down or their anxiety index went down or their fatigue index went down. So we can show them this very direct link between what's happening in their gut and how they're performing mentally. And it's a really, really cool thing to do. There are actually some studies that have been done at UCLA to show that the signal goes the other way as well. So we have been able to show gut signals change what your brain is doing. They've been able to show that brain signals change what your gut is doing. And so in those trials, what they do is they have people who are under stress, and those stress signals actually change what is happening in the gut. So stress signals will actually enhance the growth, to use one term, of bad bacteria. And so if you think about that, if you're stressed, your gut starts in your head, your gut starts to grow more bad bacteria. Those bad bacteria send a signal of stress, inflammatory stress, through the body back up to the brain. The brain gets more stressed, and you get into this vicious cycle of stress leading to more stress and more stress. And you have to break that cycle somehow. And it could be a nutritional intervention, but it could be exercise, it could be meditation, it could be a mindfulness practice. It's like, the thing I love about that is that this modern science is just showing us the sort of underlying mechanisms by which some of these ancient practices of yoga and breathing and things like that actually had their beneficial effects. So, it's sort of proving that the ancients were right.
Yeah, there's not just one thing that we can focus on. It's really for holistic health and well-being. It's really about a variety of healthy habits that have this cumulative effect. And so everyone has their own path to greater health and wellness. And in this conversation, I love what you're saying because it's giving people a whole nother avenue by which they can, explore a higher level of self-care.
Right.
You've mentioned a couple times this, measuring the microbiome. What is the process for that test?
Yeah, it's sending a poop sample into a laboratory, right? That's how we measure the microbiome. It's in your gut. And so we'll get a fecal sample from our subjects. There are a lot of companies now that you can go online and find a dozen or more companies that will measure your microbiome. And so they'll send you a kit, you pay for it, they send you a kit. It might be $200 or so. And you go to the bathroom, you do your thing, you put your sample into the little tube, send it to the laboratory. And in, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you get your results back. And here's your microbiome all analyzed. And people ask me, they go, should I go do that? Would that be interesting information? And I say, it might be interesting, but it might not necessarily be actionable for you at this point. Because when we're using it in our lab as a research tool, we will measure somebody and then we'll apply some sort of an intervention, right? That intervention might be a dietary intervention or a probiotic supplement or an exercise regimen or a mindfulness routine, whatever the intervention is. And then we measure them again. And so we're not necessarily interested in saying, here's your microbiome and this is good or bad. We're interested in how it changes from point A to point B after that intervention to show, did this intervention increase the good guys or reduce the bad guys or etc. So, a lot of times people will get their results back from one of these commercial tests and they're a little disappointed because they get all this information and they say, well, like, what do I do with this? It's a lot of numbers, but I don't know if it's really useful for anything unless you're going to change your diet or change your lifestyle. And then you're going to get another test and pay another $200, right? If you're really into it, then, by all means, choose one and see what you get. But just so people are aware of what they're paying for.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like it's another part of a fitness assessment,
Yes.
a wellness assessment. We know we do the treadmill test and the sit and reach test and the poop test.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I kind of liken it to getting your body fat measurement, right? You go get your body fat, and it comes back and it says, I'm 25% body fat. Is that good or bad? And you say, well, how do you feel about that? Now let's go on a fitness regimen, and we're going to try to get that 25 to go down to 24 or 22 or 20, right? So, all right, your regimen is going in the right direction. If you want to use it that way to sort of track your progress,
Yes,
by all means, I think that's a great way to do it.
yeah, it can be motivating for
Right.
some people, right?
Yep.
I like to think that I'm a healthy eater, but I feel like I could probably use a tune-up. So if we're thinking just like, as I'm listening to you, I'm getting really excited to, try a little harder. So, what are some foods? I know you said whole foods, but are there, and I do think that I know that I eat primarily whole foods, but if we had to just say, like, what's like the short list of foods we should target for to eat more of, to have a healthier gut? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, that is a fair question, and it really comes down to more fruits and vegetables. As simple as that. Like our grandmas knew this, back in the day. They didn't know why, but they knew that people who did that did better. They were happier, they were healthier, all the different things. And now, like I said before, now we know the sort of why that worked, but people have observed this for thousands and thousands of years. We can get a little more nuanced though. So based on the breadth of scientific evidence that's been collected on the microbiome over the last few years, we know that the sort of sweet spot is 30 plants that you want to try to get in a 7-day period. So with all my students and all the people that I teach, I say, try to do something that we call the 30 plant challenge, which is within that week, try to get 30 different kinds of plants. So that could be apples, grapes, blueberries. You start going down the list, right? When I do this in front of an audience, you can literally see people there, Cheryl, going, like, you can see them counting in their head and counting on their fingers, and you can watch. They'll get to 10 pretty easily, and then you can see them going, oh, geez, do I 15? Do I even know 20 different fruits and vegetables? You can see them getting confused. But that's what you do. You go to the produce section and you bring your cart around. And I challenge people to make fun with it. Go and find the produce person and say, what is this? I've never seen this thing before. What is it? How do I eat it? Do I cook it? Do I not? Do I peel it? Do I not? And bring it home. And that's going to be something that's going to nourish a part of your microbiome that really needs to be nourished. And the reason 30 is because really good large studies have shown that there's a difference. Your microbiome diversity is better if you have 20 versus if you have 10 in a week, and better if you have 25 than if you have 20, and better if you have 30 than you have 25. But right around 30 is where it kind of plateaus out. 35 isn't that much better than 30. So we say to people, go for 30, and the more colors you can get, the better. The more different types you can get, the better. Spices count. So if you're getting up to around 20 and you can't think of any other fruits and vegetables that sound good to you, throw some oregano in there, throw some basil in there, throw some garlic in there. Those all count because they nourish a different part of your microbiome.
I love that. It's so inspiring, and it feels like a challenge that I would be up for, and I hope our listeners are too. Let's go for 30, everybody. We were talking earlier before we started recording that you're heading to Korea. I would love to invite you to share, what is your focus these days?
Yeah, so my focus is exactly what we're talking about right now. This idea of psychonutrition, that we can improve our mental wellness through how we eat. And so, a lot of the work that I do is not just on baseline diets, like changing people from standard American diet to the Mediterranean diet, right? And I'm not, I talk about Mediterranean all the time, but that's just a catch-all term for more of a whole foods diet. In my most recent book that's called Mental Fitness, I have a mental fitness food pyramid that is based on sort of all the best parts of the Mediterranean diet and the Okinawan diet and the Scandinavian diet and all these traditional diets from around the world. But when I travel around, so I'll be in Korea next month, then I'll be in Australia, then I'll be, where am I going to be after that? So I travel around the world a lot, and to see what are the things that they're eating in those parts of the world from a traditional diet perspective. And also it gives me ideas for things that we might want to supplement our diets with. So specific types of prebiotic fibers or specific types of probiotic bacteria or different plant extracts that aren't sort of the mainstream sort of a thing. So the more that we can get that diversity of ideas from different cultures, the more things we have access to, and different strokes for different folks. Some people are going to want to change their diets. Some are going to want to drink up a sort of a smoothie concoction. Other people are going to want to go and take a walk. So all those things can help improve our mental fitness.
I love it. You've given us so much to consider, and it's so inspiring, Shawn. Where can people find you?
Probably best place is just go to my blog. So you can either type in my name, ShawnTalbott.com, and that'll bounce to my blog, or go directly there. It's called bestfutureyou.com. And the whole idea of the blog is to bring in all these different pieces of natural approaches to helping people become the best future version of themselves. So best future you.
Well, I will look forward to continuing to follow your blog and invite our listeners here today to continue in that direction. And this has been so helpful, giving us lots to be inspired about and feel, most importantly, empowered that we can continue to progress down our wellness path in whatever way serves us best. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Shawn Talbott.
My pleasure, Cheryl. Thanks for having me on.
In closing, I want to thank you once again for allowing me to be part of your journey. I hope you'll give these practices a try and see what you discover. If you have a comment or a question about today's episode, just write to me at Cheryl@thrivingwithcheryljones.com. Join me next time when we'll explore how to foster gratitude and other positive feelings. Thanks so much for listening. Be well and thrive on.
Thank you for tuning in to the Thrive 55 Plus podcast. Contact Cheryl with a burning question, access free mindfulness meditation resources, and schedule a free consultation to explore how you can achieve your goals and aspirations through personalized coaching sessions with Cheryl. Just visit her website, thrivingwithcheryljones.com. Subscribe to or follow the Thrive 55 Plus podcast. Leave a review or share it with a friend. Until next time, be well and thrive on.